Well, good evening. Happy New Year. And I'd like to welcome and call to order our Lucan Biddulph Council meeting for Tuesday, January the 3rd. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? Okay, seeing none. Well, it is a happy new year, and I trust that everyone had a good holiday. Things certainly started off with much excitement as we experienced the blizzard that seemed to paralyze much of the province for a couple of days. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank and commend our Public Works Department. As we all know, a lot of snow fell in a short period of time. Our crews were out, keeping on top of it as best they could, and then ensuring that the roads were cleared so that we could get to where we needed to go to celebrate our holidays. Our team certainly sacrificed their celebrations so that we could enjoy ours. So on behalf of council and our residents, we extend our gratitude to the Public Works Department. So as this is our first meeting of the year, it gives me great pleasure to present to you the 2023 Mayor's Honor Roll. As has been practiced the last few years, we asked for nominations from our community, and we received a number of nominations, making the final selections difficult. Once again, we are reminded of how fortunate our community is to have so many people who have given or who continue to give back to our community. I would like to encourage you to think about who makes or who has made a difference to Lucan Biddulph. And in the fall, when the nomination form is circulated again, get your nomination in for a Lucan Biddulph volunteer. As I mentioned, we received a number of nominations, so should the one that you nominated this year not be recognized, please consider resubmitting that name next year. There is no shortage of recognition opportunity when it comes to sports and recreation in Lucan Biddulph. Tom Card should be an inspiration to all of us. Tom recently competed at the International Functional Fitness Federation Masters Championship in Aruba in the 65 plus category. And as has been highly publicized, Tom won the gold medal and brought home the Male Sportsmanship Award. And this is really why Tom is an inspiration and worthy of being recognized on the honor roll. When you speak to anyone at Whole Fit, Tom's enthusiasm and encouragement of everyone working out towards achieving their fitness goals is second to none. He is their loudest cheerleader. Tom has found a supportive community that has taken his fitness journey somewhere he didn't realize he was even on the path of. He has represented Lucan Biddulph at an international level, and we know that he isn't finished yet. Alice Doby is someone so many of us in Lucan Biddulph know. Alice has always quietly contributed to our community, never asking or expecting anything in return. St. Patrick's Church and School have benefited over the years from her generous spirit. She thinks of others, offering rides home for children if she is on grandma duty in bad weather. She makes up personalized Halloween bags for all the kids in her neighborhood. Recently, her generous spirit has extended to Ukrainian families who have found temporary homes in Lucan Biddulph. She has collected new clothing, toys, and food for these families. She quickly moved into motion and was able to secure a crib, bedding, and supplies for an area Ukrainian family with a pregnant mom. As her nominator shared, Alice makes Lucan Biddulph a more enjoyable community to live in and is a true gem of a woman. Alice has a strong sense of values. She promotes the positive impact of good neighborly deeds and has contributed to the amazing small town vibe that we also love in Lucan. For anyone that has been involved in scouting over the years, you will know Ken Rees. It has been said that the scouting program in Lucan would not be what it is if not for the dedication of Ken. You can see the span of Ken's involvement in the first Lucan Cubs and Scouts, as he has had a hand in it for over 35 years. Not only do you see Ken's imprint in the program, but Ken is also responsible for the upkeep of the Scout Hall and all the equipment of this troop. A number of years ago, an idea was pitched to our Parks and Recreation Department about having an outdoor skating rink in Granton. Anyone who has had a backyard rink of their own knows that maintaining an outdoor rink can be a thankless effort. All the work put into getting the ice just right, and well, with the weather that we experience, we can never be guaranteed how long an outdoor rink will last. But the payoff comes when it is being used, no matter for how long. It takes patience and commitment to manage an outdoor rink. The Granton rink would not be the success it is without the commitment of Keith Salter and Brian Harrigan. When the idea was first broached by Councillor Westman, Keith and Brian immediately took charge, and working with our Parks and Rec department, got the logistics all figured out. Keith and Brian have not only invested their time to the rink, but they have invested in the equipment that ensures the maintenance is not as laborious. We know that the families of Granton are beyond grateful for the efforts that these guys have made over the last number of years to ensure the rink is up and running so that all can enjoy. There are not many places in Lucan Biddulph that you cannot go without seeing the impact of the Optimist Club of Lucan. Whenever we need volunteers for a community event, the Optimist can be counted on. The Optimist motto is friend of youth, bringing out the best in youth in our communities and in ourselves. Well, we see all that throughout Lucan Biddulph. Most notably, we see the investment in Elm Street Park that the Optimist Club has made. The splash pad at the park is a direct result of Optimist Club donations. In recent years, not only dollars, but sweat equity has been put into improvements in the park. I know that many family celebrations have been organized around the facilities at Elm Street. The recent pledge of $30,000 towards the building campaign at the community center and arena shows a commitment and a confidence in investing in our community. Of course, we are all familiar with the Easter egg hunts held in Lucan and Granton and the bike rodeos held on Canada Day. They have invested in field trips for students. The Optimists sponsor free skates for all to enjoy, and they will quietly support those in the community that need an extra hand. The thrift store is managed by the club and solely staffed by volunteers. Who knows what treasures you might find there? So when thrifting, make sure the store is on your place to visit, because supporting the thrift store allows them to support many initiatives across Lucan Biddulph. I'm very proud of this list. I think our community should be. So I ask you all to join me in congratulating the recipients of this year's Mayor's Honor Roll. And we will be working with the recipients over the next few weeks, whether we bring them to a council meeting or, as we've done in the last number of years, gone and presented them with the awards at their place. We'll work that out, but we'll have those details for you at the next meeting. So with that, we don't have to go into closed session, but we do have a public meeting, which we're already in, we can be considered to be in, and that is to consider a drainage report. And this is for the Atkinson Drain, branches B and J. The report is attached to our agenda, but I believe that Jeff is going to walk us through this report tonight. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, and you did mention that this is a presentation of the Atkinson Drain report. The Atkinson Drain was originally constructed in 1981. There was a request for an improvement due to the fact that branch B was not working as designed. There was a site meeting held, and it was determined that there was partial blockage of branch B, and that there was a good chance it was a tree roots causing the problem. It was also determined that replacing or repairing branch B would cause a major disruption or major disturbance to a residential property that the branch cut through. In reviewing the conditions and a discussion with the Township Road Authority, the two assessed owners and the two owners on the west side of the Corsi line, there was a number of recommendations that came through on this report. The recommendations are as follows: that the existing branch B be replaced with a new branch consisting of a 200 mil smooth wall HDP plastic pipe and be known as branch J. This would be installed on the west side of the Corsi line. And that the existing branch B from the main drain to 2 meters into the Raymer property, a total of 14 meters total, be included as part of this report for future maintenance, and that the remaining existing portion of branch B be officially abandoned. And the final recommendation is that a catch basin be installed in the Corsi road allowance on the east side to directly catch surface water in this area. All this would be incorporated into branch J of the Atkinson drain. That's the basis of the report. It's pretty straightforward.
Okay, thanks for that, Jeff. Are there any questions on this? It is fairly straightforward. Councillor Regan?
I was just curious about something. When we abandon like a drain like that, do we do anything with it? It just, or any liability for anything that happens there after
Yeah.
we abandon it?
And through the chair, it will remain as a functioning drain. But it just will not be defined as part of the municipal drain. So if the landowner wants to maintain it, it's up to his responsibility to maintain that portion. So we don't actually go in and remove it. It can still function, but it's up to the landowner to maintain it.
All right, okay, thank you, thank you. Madam Mayor.
Any other questions? Councillor Hodgins?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to confirm where this municipal drain is located. I know it says lots 3 and 4, concessions 2 and 3, but where exactly is that on Corsi line?
That's in the north part of the Corsi line, up by Adair Road. You can pull the map up here exactly. Yeah, it's just south of Adair. And it's a small drain in itself. So that's basically, it serves a few hectares. Branch B only serves 3 hectares. So.
And sorry, just one other question. And I'm not sure if you have the specific information, because it's a bit detailed, but just in the assessment portion for the township of Lucan Biddulph, we're assessed for crossing the roadway there. And it's broken down on page 5 of the report. And I just wanted to ask if you have the information, Jeff, what the administration cost was. There's the cost of the work, but then there's that administration fee of $1,100. I'm just wondering if you have or if you can clarify what that's for. It's a little bit specific, and maybe Spreets would have that.
Maybe if I could, maybe you're asking what the administrative fee is.
Yeah, on page 5 of the report there, where it's got the special assessment broken down for the township's costs. There's a $1,100 cost identified as administration cost. So just wondering what that fee or what that cost is.
Yeah, and through the chair, it's probably better that I get that in more detail for you, Counselor, just so I don't say something that's not quite right. But it'll probably be, anyways, I could, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions? Okay, so Jeff, you'll work on getting the answer back to Councillor Hodgins on that. I would imagine it's a Spreet fee or something, but if there's no other discussion on this, then we've got a recommended motion in front of us that the drainage report for the Atkinson Drain branches B and J 2022, as prepared by Spreet and Associates dated November 18th, 2022, be received and adopted, and that the first sitting of the Court of Revision on behalf of the Atkinson Drain branches B and J 2022 be scheduled to be held on February 7th, 2023. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Regan and Councillor Hodgins. All in favor? And that's carried. Okay, thank you, Jeff. We do have a delegation with us tonight, and joining us is Paul Hicks from Public Urbanism. And I think he's just joining now. There he is. And he's going to present the Urban Standard Guidelines report. So, oh, now his camera's off. He was there, now he's not. I wonder. If he can, I don't know, maybe he doesn't know that his camera's off. And his mic, yeah. Anyways, I'll just say, I think Lisa's gonna text in here. Okay. Oh, there he is again. There he is. There he is. Okay, so Paul, we are going to turn it over to you. We're going to welcome you. Can you hear me? I don't know. Can you hear me? I know well, he looks as though he can't hear. I don't think he can hear us because usually he's on top of this. Oh, there he is. Now he's unmuted. Can you hear me, Paul? No, I don't think so. I know, we're waving. Everybody, hello? No. There you go. Okay, that's too bad. Yeah. Maybe, yeah, try to rejoin. We'll give it a sec here. Well, there I see him. Now he's unmuted. No, I don't think he can hear me, though. I don't think he looks as though he can hear us. No. Nope. Oh, maybe take the taking the AirPods out work? That's too bad. That's too bad. Oh, yay!
Oh,
There he is. Well, Happy New Year. It's worth the wait, I hope.
I hope so too. Happy New Year to all of you as well. My apologies if that was on my end.
No worries. I think we are, that's all, very familiar to us now. So it's all
No
good.
doubt.
So it's great to have you with us tonight, Paul. As you say, Happy New Year, and I'll turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Is the deck visible to the group?
Yeah, no, we can see it. It's good.
Great. So good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Mayor, members of council. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm here to give a brief presentation, as I understand that the that the municipality is considering the development of subdivision guidelines, and they're also sometimes referred to as urban design guidelines for new development in the municipality. And as council's going through this decision-making process, we were asked by staff to come in and provide a brief presentation on what subdivision design guidelines are all about, how they work, the do's and the don'ts, etc. So we do have a brief presentation tonight. We'll go over the purpose of the presentation, which I've already really touched on, a background around what subdivision design guidelines are. And then as council goes through this decision-making process in terms of whether this is an initiative that council's looking to undertake in 2023, I'll discuss a little bit about the benefits, issues, and considerations that council needs to keep in mind when looking at developing subdivision guidelines. And certainly I understand that there's an opportunity for a question and answer, so I'm certainly happy to answer any of those questions or field any comments that members of council may have. So with that, I'll probably skip over this first slide, which is really the purpose of the presentation. But as I mentioned before, it's our understanding that council might be looking at the development of these guidelines in the new year, and particularly due to the influx of new residential subdivisions that the township has seen over the past number of years, and these discussions around wanting to preserve kind of some of the unique aspects and unique character of Lucan Biddulph in the face of a lot of new development coming in through the door. So in terms of a background around what subdivision design guidelines are, we start with really answering the question of what is urban design. And so I think a lot of the people in this room are likely familiar with the profession of urban planning, particularly as a municipal council, and you run into urban planners and urban planning all the time when reviewing development applications. And we also have architects that participate in this space as well too, and landscape architects that participate in this space as well too. And that's really it's the intersection of both the professions of urban planning, architecture, and landscape architecture that we see kind of the study or the practice of urban design arise. And the intention of this is to make our urban areas not only functional, but also attractive places to live. So understanding that we're looking at developing and wanting to create more attractive and functional spaces through urban design, the method to do that would be the preparation of subdivision design guidelines. And these guidelines are intended to supplement the policies that you find in your existing official plan, as well as the regulations that you'll find in your existing zoning bylaw. And they provide a design framework and direction for new residential development. So that includes not just the design of the buildings that would go in a residential development, but also the streetscape design, the design of public spaces such as parks and open space. And they also provide guidance and direction for developers that are also undertaking development on their properties as well too. So it helps to give a developer who may be coming into your municipality for the very first time a sense of what is acceptable to this community and what is acceptable to municipal council in terms of the layout and the design of their new subdivisions. Without that, what we're really doing is we're reacting solely to what a developer is putting forward. And in this case, we're proposing to the developer what we would like to see take place in our new residential subdivisions, and the development industry is reacting to that instead of us reacting to the developer's proposal. So what are they not? They are guidelines in themselves. So that means that they're not regulations, and they don't have the force of regulations, and they're not policy, and they don't have the same force as policy. So they don't have any legislative authority like a zoning bylaw or an official plan. They would be adopted by this council, and they are to supplement the authority that we find in the official plan and the zoning bylaw, but you're not going to open up the Planning Act, and you're not going to find a section in the Planning Act that deals with the legislative authority of urban design guidelines. And that's generally the nature of guidelines as themselves, as they typically don't come with legislative authority. They're there to supplement the legislative authority that already exists, and help to understand how this particular council would like to see that legislative authority that's spelled out in the official plan and the zoning bylaw implemented. So in terms of where they would be applicable, we understand that staff right now are currently exploring the development of subdivision guidelines for new residential development in the township's urban areas. This could certainly be expanded to cover all sorts of and all aspects of development across the township, or just specific areas of the township like a downtown. So you could do urban design guidelines or subdivision guidelines that would cover commercial development, residential development, and industrial development. Or you could say, you know what, we find that we sometimes struggle or are challenged with residential development, and we also are struggled and challenged by development that we're seeing occurring along our main streets. So we'd like to develop specific guidelines for specific areas. So they can be comprehensive for all sorts of development, even in the rural area, or you can scope them to specific types and forms of development. Why are urban design guidelines used or subdivision design guidelines used? Well, there's really kind of 4 key points around this. First, they're used to develop a community-driven design vision for new residential development. So this is allowing, again, the community and council to have a say and to propose to the development industry what we would like to see instead of reacting to the development industry's proposals. They are also there to ensure that new development is integrated well into the existing areas and to ensure it reflects the positive qualities of the township. I said this to staff before, and certainly we've had the pleasure of working with Lucan Biddulph in the past and being able to explore a bit of kind of the urban forms and the planning history of Lucan Biddulph. And, you know, and I've often said that Lucan Biddulph is actually a pretty unique community, particularly in the Middlesex County context, in terms of a really unique history and unique urban forms. And what we'd like to see is that unique history celebrated and incorporated into new development that would be occurring in the municipality. They're also intended to help the township take a consistent and thoughtful approach to urban design as well, too. So we're not taking kind of a haphazard or ad hoc approach where one developer is treated one way and then another developer is treated another way. But again, it provides an overall consistent framework for treating development across the municipality. And they're also there to help the township achieve not only your design or your cultural objectives, but also your environmental or public health objectives. So when we see an objective around an environmental objective around and wanting to ensure that low impact development or LID development is employed in the municipality from a sustainability perspective, or we want to ensure that we have great and accessible and usable walking trails to help improve public health. These are some of the other things that urban design guidelines or subdivision guidelines can help achieve. In terms of when they would be used, these guidelines would be used when an application for a plan of subdivision or condominium is made. And in some cases, they may also apply to site plan approvals for multi-residential development, understanding that there's some recent changes to the Planning Act with regards to when site plan approval can apply to multi-residential development. In some instances, it may be appropriate to apply the guidelines when we see rezoning applications or land division or variance applications or amendments to the official plan. Those are really case by case. Overall, I think you'd find that if you did decide to move forward with urban design guidelines, that you'd be really applying them to large development proposals, such as plans of subdivision, condominium, or site plan approvals. When are they not used? Equally as important as to when they are used. So it's important to note that the applications for a standard building permit would not require, do not require planning permission. So do not require land division, do not require rezoning or minor variance. A standard individual coming in through the door wants to replace their front porch, let's say, that's not something that's going to kick in the use of the guidelines. So this won't impact people that are simply applying for building permits in the municipality. It really is intended to apply, and certainly council can scope down when they are to be applied, but they're really intended to be applied to new development that's coming into the municipality. They're also not applied to, again, the regular maintenance of a building or property. So if we were in a situation where an individual, again, wanted to replace windows or doors on a property, they're not going to have to adhere to those urban design guidelines. Now, certainly staff and particularly building staff can certainly provide those guidelines to a property owner to be used as kind of inspiration, or if they're looking to kind of understand what the municipality is looking to see in terms of a renovation or building, they can be applied for and can be provided to that individual. And that individual can, at their own discretion, decide whether or not they'd like to use them, but there's no mandate for that. There's also no mandate to bring properties up to a specific standard. So if guidelines were brought in tomorrow, again, the focus is on new development coming forward. It's not necessary. It's not to turn around or to try to require properties to be brought up to a new standard that's being introduced in the municipality. In terms of how they're used, this is a little bit of a flow chart showing you kind of the standard development process. And I'll start off on the left-hand side. So we see a plan of subdivision or condominium or site plan applications that's been received. When it's being processed by staff, one of the first questions that's going to be asked is, does the application involve residential development? If it doesn't involve residential development, then it's going to proceed through the standard normal process as it proceeds through today. If it does involve residential development, we're going to see the application is reviewed for conformity under the official plan, the zoning bylaw, the municipality's engineering or servicing standards, and it will also then subsequently be reviewed under the municipality's subdivision design guidelines. So this is introducing another layer into the review process. This is another tool that staff and council will have to review the application, or another lens to review the application through. Subsequently, council will make a decision on the application, and then that individual will then receive their building permit, or of course, there is always the opportunity to appeal decisions under the Planning Act. So if they don't like that decision, it can be appealed. Where I wanted to point out with this particular flow chart is we're not introducing any new steps. The adoption of subdivision design guidelines is not going to create another step in the process. It is going to create another layer in the process. And that's where I'm talking about the tools that staff and council will have to review the application. So currently right now, those applications are reviewed under your official plan. They're reviewed under your zoning bylaw. They're reviewed under your engineering standards. And this would form another lens or another layer in which staff and council would review the application. In terms of benefits, issues, and considerations, 3 categories here. So some of those benefits that I was talking about previously: consistent approach to urban design, provides design direction that otherwise doesn't exist in your official plan or your zoning bylaw. And that's not a commentary on Lucan Biddulph's official plan and zoning bylaw. This would be a standard approach that we would see in municipalities across Ontario. And it does, one of those other benefits is enhancing that sense of place and protecting that character, which we know is very important to this council and to Lucan Biddulph as a whole, preserving that unique history and that unique character that Lucan has. And also, they can also assist with the overall branding and marketing of community by creating that kind of consistent approach to design. In terms of the issues, we do end up often with different interpretations from professionals. This is really no different than when you have, a municipal planner and a development proponent's planner coming to different conclusions as to how to interpret policies or regulation. No different than you're going to see that as well. That you're going to have some professionals that are going to be reviewing your design guidelines and see them one way, and you're going to see staff view them as another way. How they are used really does depend on community support. So just like the application of your official plan and your official plan policies, it really does require buy-in from the local community to make sure that they're properly implemented, and it requires buy-in from council as well too. Because these don't have legislative authority, and so you're not mandated under the Planning Act to develop them or to maintain them, that buy-in and that support from the community and from council does become all the more important in moving forward with subdivision guidelines. And as I mentioned before, while it doesn't create a new step in the development process, we can't ignore the fact that it does create another layer of development review. So that layer, again, official plan, zoning bylaw, your engineering standards, and then we'll have a new layer of review in there, which is your urban design guidelines. In terms of considerations that I would encourage council to take a look at when you're contemplating the development of them or retaining a firm to develop them for you, you'll want to think about how strict or flexible they should be. There's kind of, there's the Goldilocks zone that we always want to be in when we're providing some very consistent and direct direction. But we also want to ensure that there's enough flexibility that we're allowing for creative design, innovative design to occur in our new subdivisions. And we're not pigeonholing developers into producing cookie cutter developments across the municipality. there's this idea and concept of kind of wanting to recognize that unique character that exists in Lucan Biddulph. That's again something that we would go through, or that a municipality would go through as a part of their public consultation process, and trying to understand what the unique aspects of Lucan Biddulph are and how we can incorporate them into design guidelines. Also, council want to consider how subdivision guidelines or design guidelines would fit into the broader strategies that council is looking to employ. So how does this fit in with your council strategic plan? How does this fit in with your any economic development plans or strategies that you may have? How do they merge and mesh with your engineering standards that may already exist? Do you have active transportation strategies that you are thinking about? All sorts of different strategies and plans that the municipality might be considering. We're going to want to make sure that they dovetail and that they work as a system. And the final consideration that I'd throw to this council when thinking about developing subdivision guidelines is really understanding the capacity that exists within your organization to implement them. So what kind of expertise do you need to implement them? Is there an expectation that these are going to be reviewed internally by the municipality's existing planning staff through the County of Middlesex? Would you consider hiring an architect or an urban designer and to peer review them and charge that back to a developer applicant, the same way that that engineering plans are peer reviewed currently outside of the organization, and that's charged back? So understanding who's going to be implementing is also going to be a key consideration, and understanding how strict and flexible and how detailed those guidelines need to be as well too. So questions of capacity are also really important to think about. So with that concludes the presentation that I have. So I'm going to stop sharing. I hope I didn't go through that too quickly. I know that council's on a bit of a tight timeline, so I do want to be respectful of time, but I'll pass it back over to you, Madam Mayor. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions that your council may have.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Paul. I think that gives us a good overview of what we need to consider going forward. So with that, I will ask council if there is any questions or clarifications or points of discussion that you want to bring up at this point. Councillor Regan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just wondering, I'm not sure who can answer this, but when would this process start? And how do we get this moving? And I'm not sure who to direct that to, Your Worship.
Okay. I don't know whether that would be
Jeff?
Jeff.
Yeah, Madam Mayor. So basically this process has started, in the fact that council has directed that they are interested in bringing forth guidelines. Where we are today is that we wanted to get everybody on the same plane on understanding what guidelines mean to the municipality. And then once we've got today in place, that everybody's on the same plane, now we can go to the next step and begin to put the guidelines together. How we put those guidelines together, that's the next step. I think we got to answer that. We can bring in some outside help and work with council on bringing some guidelines together. We can bring in some guidelines for council to comment on. But I don't really, Paul, I would maybe ask Paul to comment on, his recommendation on producing guidelines. Basically, we're not, guidelines aren't new to to Ontario, but they're new to us. And so we don't really have anything to update. So is there the next step? Is there a better way of the next step? Because we're creating brand new guidelines at Lucan Biddulph. Maybe that's a question more for Paul's experience than mine. But from my aspect, we're now all on the same plane. And that's what we want to do, is get to the next step of introducing or developing the guidelines. So maybe Paul, if you could.
Happy to through you, Madam Mayor. So in terms of there's kind of two, I think, initial next steps that this council will be looking at, and one is that procurement process, and I'll perhaps allow your CAO and Mr. Little and that team to comment on any kind of procurement steps that you'd need to have to go through to retain a firm to assist you in developing them. In terms of kind of what those initial next steps, once you've retained a firm to develop the guidelines, what that looks like. It really begins typically with workshops with council and municipal staff to begin to understand kind of some of the basics and fundamentals of, going to those questions of strict versus flexible, what type of capacity exists in-house, and really what we're trying to accomplish through the development of the guidelines. After those initial steps with council and staff, then subsequently we would be setting up workshops with the local community, and those would be workshops to help develop that community-driven design direction that I was speaking about at the beginning of the presentation. So those are questions around what does the community, what do they value when living in Lucan Biddulph? What makes it a unique and wonderful place to live in for them? What are questions around the culture and the history of Lucan Biddulph that we want to celebrate? We're also engaging usually during that process with the development industry as well too, to try to understand what their needs are and what their requirements are. I think we're quite lucky in this particular situation in that we've got a development industry that's likely through their work in the broader region, and particularly in the City of London, quite used to dealing with design guidelines. So that's not going to be a new prospect for them to understand. But having gone through that, those initial steps are really a consultative program with council, staff, with the public, and with the development industry to identify what that community-driven vision looks like for the development of them. Then normally what we would do after that is, once we've gathered all that information, we're going to go take a look at what the best practices are and the current practice out there for the development of guidelines, prepare a draft, and then we would go through that kind of, I would call it a standard iterative process that you'll often see with the development of planning documents, where we bring the draft forward for council to look at and the public to look at. We refine that, and then we come back with another version of it, refine it further, and then come back with the finalized version of the document. But that would be the standard process that we'd be looking at for the development of them outside of your initial procurement process.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Paul.
Okay, any other? Oh, Jeff, yep.
And just to kind of follow up, Paul said, one of the things that I'm interested in determining as part of the next step is how far do we want to take this? That's really what I'm interested in. Is how far do we want to go down this road, and how precise are our guidelines going to want to be? And that's a question that I look to council for direction on, because we can do some basics, or we can do some very thorough guidelines, and we can do everything from climate change, accessibility, all these sort of things can be built into guidelines, and so that when we do get some of these new developments coming in, we're already ahead of the game by seeing that we're expecting these things to be built in. But again, I go back to what I'm looking for is how much we're going to do here.
Ron?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think an important part of this whole thing is what Paul had on his presentation, that this is another sort of layer, but we need to be careful, because that kind of runs counterproductive to what the province is trying to do under Bill 23, and that's getting things moved through the process a little faster. So I think we need to be aware of it. I don't think we need to be scared of it, that we don't want to do this because we're going to upset the province, but I think we need to be careful as to how we move forward, because we're not looking to make more work for the developers. I think what we're trying to do is give them some guidance as to what council's expectations are with regards to new development coming in. Do we want, things like, mini roundabouts and subdivisions to sort of break up long stretches? Do we want things nice and square? Do we want things sort of nice and curvy, or what are council's expectations? And I think if we look at this document from that standpoint, it doesn't need to be interpreted by the developers that this is going to cost them more money. It's going to be more work. So I think that's important.
Any other follow-up questions, discussion from Councillor Hodgins?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, a few comments, kind of adding on what Ron was just saying there. Just thinking maybe some concern I have is about adding that other layer and how that may affect the planning process. I think it was the Bill 109 that introduced those changes to review timelines and refunds if we can't get things done in time. And just, I'm wondering if this would be a necessary layer and if it would really provide the benefit, or if we have the tools that we need within our official plan and zoning bylaw to get what we need. Because I seem to recall in our last official plan amendment number 10, there was a lot of language built in there about what we want to see from an urban design perspective, and urban design briefs may be required for certain types of developments. So maybe some of those comments, it'd be good to get comment from our colleagues at the Middlesex County planning staff. I feel like whatever we decide here and wherever we want to go with this, I do think that they should be closely involved with that. And so I guess a little bit unfortunate we didn't have our planner here tonight that didn't have this at the same time, but I'd be interested to know what the county planning's experience has been with these design guidelines. I know Middlesex Center does have urban design guidelines. They're more of the comprehensive type that cover infill and commercial and industrial and everything. And I'd be interested to know from our planning staff how those work for them. I think that's just a couple comments there. Thank you.
Maybe, I think Councillor Hodgins brings up a good point about Bill 109, and I don't know, Paul, I mean, again, if we're putting you on the spot, but in talking with your colleagues in the industry, have you seen communities that already have guidelines? I mean, I guess it's one thing if they're already in place, then you've got developers that are already working with them, so there's already an expectation of what they know what going in. But have you heard anything about pushback about introducing like these design guidelines? Has some of the legislation that the province brought down, does it create almost a
Conflict.
like a conflict between the two? Have you been hearing anything about that throughout your through your colleagues?
Sure, I'm happy to field that, Madam Mayor. So not at this time. We haven't heard really any kind of pushback on the creation of new urban design guidelines vis-a-vis the new legislation that's come in and the changes to the Planning Act, particularly with regards to, as was noted, kind of the timelines, the legislated timelines that any municipality has to approve an application, and the refund of fees, which has now been introduced as well too. I think the one thing that I would probably want to point out to council when I do refer to that, kind of that additional layer of analysis that's taken place, if we were to look at kind of on the ground how this would function. So we have a standard subdivision application that's going to come in through the door in Lucan Biddulph. It's going to walk in through the door tomorrow. And that application is not just an application form and a plan of subdivision. It's the application form. It's a plan of subdivision. It's a stormwater management report. It's a servicing study. It's perhaps an environmental impact statement. It's an archaeological assessment, all of which are reviewed at the very same time. They're not reviewed successively one after the other. So, if the municipality has developed subdivision guidelines, then we end up with an urban design brief that also is going to be submitted that's going to address those subdivision design guidelines, or pardon me, those guidelines, and it will be reviewed at the same time that the stormwater management report is being reviewed and the environmental impact statement is being reviewed, et cetera, et cetera. Where I'm going with that is there is always the potential risk that exists that the urban design guideline is going to be the sticking point that's going to drag the discussion out. If I were to, you know, as a planner with 20 plus years in the industry, have I seen that many times? No. Usually the larger sticking points that a council is going to run into are going to be related to, you know, a servicing strategy that's being proposed. Who's going to front end the cost of extending a water line? Those are usually the larger and longer term sticking points that happen in the review of a development application. I'm not sure, quite frankly, if I've ever run into it, and I don't want to say that the risk isn't there. But I'd want to say that the likelihood of the urban design guidelines, your subdivision guidelines being the sticking point that's going to cause us to go over a legislative or a statutory timeline and have to force the return of application fees. You know, if I would be quite frank, I think that the risk of that is quite low for the municipality. It's likely going to be another sticking point.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Councillor Regan?
A comment, please, Madam Mayor. When I'm thinking about this, and I don't see it as a barrier or as a block or a stick. I don't even see it as a sticking point. I see it as an opportunity, because we've talked about this before. I see it as an opportunity for us to have a say in what things are going to look like. That's how I see this. If I'm understanding what this, it's not just urban design, but it's design about, you know, what our businesses are going to look like, what our downtown is going to look like, and ever safety in our community, traffic calming, all those sorts of things. So I think it gives us an opportunity, I think, if I'm understanding this right, to be able, as a council, to have some say in what things are going to look like in the future. And we think about what it's going to look like in 5, 10, and 15 years, and those decisions that we make in the next couple of years are going to affect what the community looks like in 15 years. So that's how I see this, is that not as being a detriment or slowing things down. I see this as an opportunity for us to, and with the public input, to see, to put things in place that our community wants, to make it a better community, a walkable community, a more livable community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Hodgins?
Thank you. Just an additional question that came up. I know it probably depends on how far we want to take this, but do we have a rough idea of what the cost of undertaking this this study would be?
Yeah, I guess, Madam Mayor, so we originally had talked about 30,000 in the budget. But again, I kind of don't mean to harp too much, but again, it depends a lot on expectations. And I don't want to bring something back and excuse me, and have the expectation of council say, yeah, that's not what I thought $30,000 was going to get us. That's my real concern here. And we did that, you know, and that's what I want to nail down with this, because it is something that each counselor could have a different take on a certain aspect of the guidelines. And I think we got to come together and bring those guidelines together. So there's a little bit of discussion here.
Well, I do. I think that probably what Paul's presented us tonight, I would say to my colleagues, you know, let's take this for information, sit on it, and come back at a future council meeting, either the next one or the first one in February, have a fulsome discussion, because I do think, I mean, these can be as prescriptive, I guess, as we want. How far down do we want to go? And I think we need to wrap our head around that. I think Councillor Hodgins brought up some good points about it will take some homework on our part of maybe looking at some of the guidelines that our neighbors have to compare where it is that how far we want to go to get a sense of what these look like. So that would be my suggestion after tonight, is to think about it and then have a discussion at a future council meeting. Did you have another follow-up, Councillor Hodgins?
Yeah, just
Yeah.
to follow up on the cost, I think, so this type of study or project would normally be a DC eligible report, being it's growth related. Is that correct? And from what we're going to hear shortly, it would no longer be?
Well, I don't think we're hearing about it shortly. I think we've already heard about it. But I don't know whether or not it is growth. I mean, I guess because it is subdivisions, it could be, but yeah. Whether it's DC recoverable at this stage, I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. As Ron says, our next speaker might be able to answer that. Paul, I did have a question though, just so I can wrap my head around. So the guidelines that we develop, are they for site plans or are they intended to be to go directly with the subdivision development agreements?
For sure, Madam Mayor. So I think with the experience that what Lucan Biddulph could likely expect is something along the lines of 90% of the time, they're going to apply simply to a new subdivision or condominium application coming in. You may find it where there's an existing lot of record, an existing vacant parcel where somebody wants to construct a new apartment building or condo on, I shouldn't say condo, let's just say apartment building. I'm mixing up my terms here, an apartment building on it that a site plan control is only applicable to. So in those cases, you're kind of, if I were to look at a split that I think you could expect, it's probably 90% of the time they're going to be used for subdivision and condo applications, and maybe kind of like 5 to 10% of the time they're going to be used on the rare site plan application you might get for a multi-residential development. And again, with the recent change of the Planning Act, I believe that it's multi-res under 6 units, site plan approval no longer applies as well too. So without the application of a site plan control bylaw for those developments that are under the 6 units, you also would have your urban design guidelines or subdivision design guidelines to fall back on. So a bit of a elongated response there, but my guess is you'd be dealing with it, the vast majority, just simply with subdivision and condo applications, kind of with my understanding of the types of applications that Lucan Biddulph sees.
Sorry, put my mic on. I guess the other question, and this might be again on your expertise, but what makes a set of guidelines successful in your mind?
For sure. I think that's a great question. I think the 2 key components of that really are that initial buy-in from the community and council and making sure that it's a community-driven exercise. The development, in terms of the development of them, what makes them successful is a full engagement program with all the involved stakeholders. And I think in the long term about what makes the implementation of those guidelines successful is really hitting that Goldilocks zone in terms of what the capacity is for the municipality to implement them. So that goes to those questions of strict versus flexible. Do you have an urban designer on staff that's going to be reviewing these development applications? Certainly in the City of London, they would. That's not likely the case in a community the size of Lucan Biddulph. So we want to kind of hit that sweet spot in terms of understanding what the capacity, and that goes to when get the council's question with regards to wanting to comment about wanting to make sure that Middlesex County staff are involved. We would certainly want to see, and Lucan Biddulph would certainly want to see that staff involved in the development of them, to make sure that we hit that right zone, and in terms of the strict versus flexible, and in terms of very detailed versus more high level.
Okay, thanks. And then I just have one final question. And that, I mean, obviously we've had a lot of development over the last few years and construction, and we've often, aside from design standards, we've talked about construction standards. So would they fall within this plan as well, or is that a separate thing? And do we need guidelines to essentially guide those construction standards?
It's I'm going to give you kind of a non-answer on that, because it really depends which way council wants to kind of take that. So certainly urban design guides can get into kind of the construction area of development in terms of, particularly when we go back to, I made comment earlier about low impact development practices, or LID development practices. They kind of cross into the threshold of construction standards. So it's a bit of a fuzzy line. And the other option that council would have in that respect, and that we often see municipalities do, is they develop new building bylaws that contain more detailed construction standards. They're developed under the Building Code Act, Municipal Act, all the rest of that fun stuff. So council does have a couple options to consider. They can kind of dive into the construction area with some of the guidelines, or can develop a much more detailed building bylaw under different pieces of legislation.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Jeff, did you have comment?
Yeah, and just to follow up, Madam Mayor, I would I do see us leading into construction standards. I know a lot of our neighboring municipalities have some form of construction standards. Ours, I think we had some originally, Ron, years ago. We've now tended to fall back to the City of London. And but I do see that this gives us the ability to then to move into the next stage of construction, or at least some sort of construction standards.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other further comment or questions or discussion while we've got Paul with us? Okay, with that, then I will thank you, Paul, for joining us tonight. You have given us a lot to think about, and I do think that there'll be more to consider. Did you have something else, Jeff?
I'd just like to say thank you to Paul. I know some of it's a repeat of information, but it really opens the discussion. And that's what this was meant to do tonight, is to get everybody's mind going, because I think this is going to be something we push forward sooner than later. And I think this gets us all in that gear. So I'd just like to say thank you, Paul, for giving us kind of the brief Cole's notes on guidelines. So thank you.
Right. And I will echo that. So thanks very much, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Happy New Year to this group, and best of luck in your decision making.
Great. We'll talk soon.
Cheers. Bye now.
Okay, so with that, I do have a motion in front of us that the subdivision guidelines presentation dated January 3rd, 2023 be received for information. If I can get a mover and a seconder for that, please. Deputy Mayor Manders and Councillor Regan. All in favor? And that's carried. So our second guest tonight, again, is a familiar face, Lisa Courtney from BM Ross. And of course, Lisa's here today. I don't know whether or not she's got a presentation, but I believe it is a discussion. And it's a request that the deputy mayor made at our last meeting based on the letter that we received from BM Ross, as I said, our last meeting that generated some questions. So we invited Lisa to come and be on the hot seat, because we know she's got all the answers and she's be able to work through everything in front of us. But in all seriousness, thanks for joining us, Lisa. Happy New Year. It's great to see you, and I'll turn it over to you.
Happy New Year. Nice to see council again and staff. I hope everybody had a nice time over the holidays. So I'm just going to go over a few points from my letter from December 8th about some of the new changes to the Development Charges Act that were made through Bill 23, the More Homes Built Fast Act. So one of the new changes that impacts Lucan Biddulph's current collection of development charges is the addition of a new exemption for third units in existing residential and new residential developments. Previously, a second dwelling unit was exempt. So let's say I have a house and I put a basement apartment in, that second unit was exempt from development charges. Now I have a house and I put in the basement apartment unit, and then I have a shed out back and I put an apartment above the shed. That third unit would also be exempt from development charges. So that's one of the new changes, and that is currently in effect as of November 28th, 2022. And if there's any questions kind of as we go through, just give a wave or a holler and we can kind of discuss as we go. Another addition or change to the Act was the exemptions for affordable and attainable housing. These are not currently in effect, and this is because we don't yet have a definition for attainable. Dip the cat says hello. There's your Zoom bingo for today. So we're still waiting for the ministry to provide some guidance on what affordable and what attainable is. And once we get those, then we will likely see those put into effect. One of the big changes that certainly will affect any new bylaws you pass is the removal of studies from development charges. So I was listening to the previous presentation, and while urban design guidelines would probably be something you could collect for through development charges under the old rules, under these new rules, you can't collect for any studies. So this includes things like the urban design guidelines, EAs, master plans. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick to show you the impact of this. And I apologize for my feline companion tonight. He's
No,
apparently
that's okay. It's keeping everybody calm. He's keeping
Yeah.
everybody calm while you deliver this news. So that's fine.
apparently he's not used to me going back to work. So I'll just share my screen here. Bear with me. I just ran some quick calculations to show what the impact could be. So right now your development charges, I'm just going to zoom in here. So hopefully these numbers are nice and visible for everybody. Currently about 5% of your development charge is studies. So we've got the master plan in there, the EA for the sewage treatment plant, you're all currently collecting for, but any new development charge bylaw you pass, you cannot collect studies. So if we just assumed, we have the same development as we did from Q1 to Q3 of 2022, and I just basically took out the costs of the studies, it makes a difference. You would collect $44,000 less. So that's money that you cannot collect from future development for studies that benefit future development, which is rather unfortunate. And the next kind of major impact that will impact not your current bylaw, but your next bylaw is the mandatory phasing in of development charges. So any new development charge bylaw or any folks that were unlucky enough to pass one last year, they now they can only collect 80% of their calculated development charge in the first year, goes up to 85 in the second year, 90 in the third year, and 95 in the fourth year. So just for the purposes of kind of looking at what this could do to the numbers, if we assume the same amount of development for the next 4 years using your current development charge numbers, right now you would collect about $824,000 in development charges. If you were to have to phase that in and only collect 80%, you would only collect $623,000 on year one, $662,000 in year two. You'd collect just a little over $700,000 in year three, and $740,000 in year five. In total, the difference between what you collect over 4 unphased years and 4 phased years, just based on, again, this is just a very simple comparison of your existing DCs, you're short $569,000, which is about the difference of about 17%. So that is one of the major impacts that we see from these new development charges rules. And while it doesn't affect you currently, your new development charge bylaw will certainly be affected. And this is what a lot of the municipalities are talking about, because it really makes it difficult for your treasurer to do financial planning, because one thing with development charges, the amount you actually collect is totally dependent on whoever walks in the door and asks for a building permit. So it makes it very difficult to forecast what might come in. And it ultimately means that development isn't truly paying for growth-related costs. Some of those costs will need to be handled or paid for by your existing tax base. Another change that has come about that will affect your next bylaw is the DC bylaws now have a longer lifespan. They're no longer just 5 years. They are a 10-year bylaw now. Of course, you can still do one earlier if you wish, but that would be a decision up to council. And then they've also added in, and this would affect your current bylaw. This came into effect as of November 28th, discounts for rental housing units. So if I am building a rental apartment building and they're all 3-bedroom units, I would get a 25% discount on my development charges. There's a 20% discount for 2-bedroom units and a 15% for anything that wouldn't fall under 2 or 3 bedrooms. I should also mention that included in the removal of studies from development charges, you can also no longer collect the cost for doing the background report through development charges. I haven't figured out the logic behind that one yet. And then from a administration point of view, they've added a requirement, and this comes into effect for your next fiscal year, is that you spend or allocate at least 60% of your DC reserves for water, wastewater, and services related to a highway. I don't know how they will monitor or enforce that. I've sat in on a few sessions about these changes and nobody seems to really know how that might be enforced or monitored, but I would say that by having these projects in development charges, you are allocating that money to them. So I'm not sure where this 60% comes from or why it was needed to be mandated into the Development Charges Act. So that's the quick and dirty summary of the changes. So I'd be happy to try and take any questions.
Well, we certainly appreciate the work that you put into that, for sure. I know that all of this has been thrown at your industry, and I mean, we've been stumped by it all. So thank you, Lisa, for working through that. You certainly putting it down, giving us actual numbers to what this actually means is very helpful. Yeah, just thank you. So questions or comments, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, so I've got a couple questions. So when they haven't really come up with a definition of attainable or affordable, and then also if there is amendments going forward, depending on how as the complaints come into them, if they decide to amend anything, will we just, obviously all municipalities throughout Ontario will be adjusting on the go, which has not been seen before, but which is fine. We'll be adjusting on the go our DC charges, correct? Opening them back up, closing them, opening them back up then as we learn more?
Well, this is the first time since I've started doing development charges that I have seen changes put into effect that immediately amend existing bylaws. So I worked with the municipality that passed a development charge bylaw this year, so just this past year. And so this mandatory phasing in affects their bylaw. They are not required to go back in and amend their bylaw. They just have to keep track of these changes and make sure that they're following the new law. It all depends on how the transition rules are written when they make changes to the act. So sometimes it only affects the next bylaw you do. Sometimes the act overrides your bylaw. So it will depend on how they make the changes.
Lisa, just before the Deputy Mayor answers his or asks his next question, the phasing in, and you bring up a municipality that you worked with that already passed it. Now, if I'm not mistaken, because I know that I think the Deputy Mayor, we all have a concern just about the timelines. We were hoping that we're going to be in a position where we could have passed a new bylaw, but that phasing in, was it not retroactive to the beginning now of 2022? So even if we had passed a bylaw in March of 2022, it would have retroactively been changed, and essentially we would have had to refund money.
They didn't make anybody issue refunds, but it would have affected your bylaw. Like you would have been only able to collect 80%.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Now that's, us moving forward though on our new DC charges is very very important. Accepting this, unfortunately, and moving forward is very important because it's a sadder chart up there. If you were to put a chart up there of our current DCs, and this is no blame to staff or BM Ross, but our inaction going forward, if depending on what our new DC charges are, as Councillor Hodgins has said several times, we all have a concern of not collecting. So, that chart, we'd really be hanging our heads on what our current DCs and maybe where they could be or should be today. Then, when is, I think, I'm kind of past the stage of complaining about this and accepting it and moving forward. And what is the timeline now for I believe you're working on our studies now.
Yep, so now that we have the EA and the costing for the new wastewater treatment plant pretty in a good spot, we're certainly going to move forward as quickly as we can on getting that draft report available, and then that starts the clock on 60 days until the new bylaw can be passed.
So sorry, when do you think we'll have that?
I'm hoping by the end of February that we would have the draft report available and up for review. So before it's up on the website for public review, we would have it back to council.
So if we say March 1st, 60 days, March, and then April, May. So then we're looking at if potentially adopting new DC charges in June.
May, June, yeah.
May, June. Yeah. And like I say, this, this is, there's, and then I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, that as things get amended and changed, which is a pain for obviously our staff and yourself, for everybody, it's a matter of changing and changing your bylaws, right? And adapting that.
Yeah. And it, again,
just abiding by the law.
Yeah. And it depends on how they write the new rules. If they're going to apply to anything new going forward, or if they're going to do this retroactive thing, which was new and exciting.
What worries me more so, and I'd sooner our conversation with our staff and even the mayor change to, what really concerns me is when we go to stroke the check, potentially in 4 or 5 years for $15-18 million, and our DC charges, that. If all of a sudden in 4 years they go, what, they say this really worked well, and all of a sudden they, is there any way to protect ourselves, which it doesn't sound like there is all of a sudden the government stays in power, there's a new government, they like that, and they just say, what, it's going to be 50%. Talk about a big impact as we decide to, if with the new sewer plant and that expense, like talk about the taxpayers having to pay for that. If they change, and go, what, we went 80, 90, 95, back to 100%, and they go, we're going to flip this back to 50. That'll be very concerning. That would be very concerning. I think right now, these next 4 years, I didn't like that chart, but it's, I think growth is still going to be very important to our community, and it's still going to be, it's going to help offset expenses, and it's we need to move on and adapt and get moving on this. I'm a little disappointed. I like hearing timelines, and I hope they're held. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Councillor Hodgins.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you, Lisa, for the presentation and information. I really liked your numbers you presented. I was going to ask about that, so that's fantastic that you had prepared that. I think something that may be important or prudent for us to consider doing is formalizing those numbers in a report to council, so we have those estimates of what these cost impacts are and what we are going to do about that. I think there was word from the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing that municipalities will be made whole. I'm not going to hold my breath for that, but I think it is important that we quantify and understand what the impact is, so we can plan and respond accordingly.
you mind if I
ahead.
just
Yeah.
jump in, Jaden? So I think on that, so I think it's important to remember that those numbers that you put together were based on our current DC charge, right? Correct, Lisa?
That's correct.
Okay, so I mean, but that is very helpful. I think that's very helpful for us. Because obviously that's the only number we know right now. You're in the process of preparing what that new DC number is. And then of course we can see the impact of that. We could see the impact of that if we use the same numbers maybe that we had for permits for last year, and then apply it to whatever that new number is when they get it in the next 6 weeks or so. But those numbers, to your point, Councillor Hodgins, I think when we go to Roma and we present to the ministry, we'll be able to actually say, this is today what it's costing, and make our story there, and we'll be able to tell our story with those numbers. So I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Hodgins, that these numbers are key to us telling our story.
Thank you. Another question, Lisa, do you have an idea, or do we have an idea what we can do to mitigate the impact of these changes? And are we seeing any strategies, approaches, or best practices from other municipalities or cities on how they're approaching this? What they're planning on doing? Do we have any ideas of what we can do at this point?
I'll be honest, I haven't seen any new strategy. I think everybody is still reeling a little bit and scratching their heads about what they might do, and how municipalities might be made whole, as everybody heard the minister said and is really hoping he'll come through on, whether that's increased grant funding for infrastructure projects. That's a hope, but not a guarantee. I haven't seen any or heard any news of new grant programs yet. I haven't heard of any municipalities trying new revenue streams, through different levies that they might be able to collect through the Municipal Act. I think we'll have to probably wait and see what some of the bigger centers do. They tend to take the lead on this. They've got kind of the resources to try these things, and then honestly usually this stuff ends up at the OLT, because there's some ruling on what's fair and reasonable or not, so I imagine it will be probably a few years before the full impacts of this is all shaken out.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Lisa. Just a couple of comments here. Totally agree with what Councillor Hodgins said. Those numbers, what we can do is substitute those numbers with an estimated new development charge cost as well, to sort of get sort of the current picture and what we think the new picture will be. So those are good numbers to have. But one of the when I had my meeting with one of the members from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs staff, I said to them, this has thrown a curveball to our municipal council anyway, because I said this could have the opposite impact to what the provincial government is trying to do, which is get more houses built faster. This flies in the face of it, because I said potentially the shift of costs from the development industry and new development to the existing taxpayer could sway council to the point where they say, you know what, we've for the past 30 years have told our residents that development pays for development. The development charge tool is how we do that. Suddenly the province has pulled the rug out from underneath us. Potentially council could say, you know what, maybe we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that to our existing taxpayers, which would then put a freeze on growth, which would have the opposite impact of what the province was trying to do. I think we all understand what we're trying to do. But my conversation with the ministry rep was that, in Lucan Biddulph, by God, we've got 20.9% growth over the last census. What more can we do? You tell us, were we doing something wrong? I don't think we were doing anything wrong. Leave us alone. Let us do what we were doing, because we were doing a pretty good job, I think. And you know, the development industry, obviously you're okay with it because they keep wanting to build here. So I don't know, this is gonna have this is a big budgetary issue for council moving forward. It could, like I said, it could have the opposite impact of what the province is trying to do. That's my biggest concern.
Councillor Regan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just to the deputy mayor's point about the issue of protection and what may happen. Is there any, I suppose I'm looking for a guarantee, but I know I'm not going to get that. But I mean, we talked to the minister at Roma. And do we mention this? Do we say to them like this is, I mean, I'm very concerned about that. We had talked earlier about that, but I'm very concerned about the fact that how do we protect ourselves considering that we've done everything we're supposed to do? It concerns me, and I'm just not sure what suggestion. I don't know if the deputy mayor got an answer to that or not. So I'm just not sure what we can do or what we can ask for.
Well.
If I may,
Yeah.
I'll take a stab at that one. There are no guarantees, period. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. We are creatures of the province. We have to do what they say. And just like Bill 23 kind of dropped the bombshell on us, they could do that again. However, when we make our presentation at the Roma conference, it's, I don't believe we want it to be a threat to them. It's not a threat. It's just, this is what may happen. It may happen. And because simply council has a responsibility to the existing taxpayers as well. And yes, we want growth. I think we've proven that over the last 10 years. We want growth. We were doing a good job based on these criteria and these guidelines. You suddenly pulled the rug out from underneath us. And now it makes us look bad because I know we're all going to get people coming up to us going, you said that wasn't going to happen, that we didn't have to pay for it. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry he doesn't pay the new tax bill because, based on Lisa's spreadsheet there, 44,000 just for the studies component alone represents basically a 1% property tax increase. And that's just for the studies component. Ouch. That hurts. That's going to make a major impact on budgets going forward. I don't know.
I mean, yeah, I think the thing is every time that we can get in front of the government to tell our story, that's what we have to do. Deputy Mayor is absolutely right. We can't sit here and just, clasp our hands and think, oh, like this is the way it is. And we've got to figure out how we're going to work with it. And we have to make our decisions based on what's being legislated to us. That still doesn't stop us from going to conferences when we see our MPP, when we have having these discussions, telling our story, and there's really, I mean, we have a lot of educated residents in Lucan Biddulph too. I mean, there's nothing to stop them from picking up the phone and talking to our MPP and, sharing their concerns. This isn't just a conversation that is happening around horseshoes. It's happening in homes, it's happening in businesses, and the government has to hear it from everybody. Deputy Mayor.
Maybe with Catherine here. So that shortfall that's up there in the red, like it's interesting. We've definitely always, another conversation we've always had is that when it comes to the septic systems in the rural area, like will this shortfall come out of the general tax base, I guess, right?
Well, my understanding has always been that water pays for water, sewer pays for sewer. So it would be those users that would have to short the shortfall for that project.
So then the studies and that and all that it would be easy to do then so that would be just gathered from those that are on the sewer, on the sewer. Okay.
So yes, you're absolutely correct. So the EA, it's specific to the sanitary sewer. So that would become a sanitary sewer expense.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
But sorry, but Lisa, again, we have collected and we're still collecting with the existing fees that we've got in place. We can still use that money that we've collected for the EA. It can still go towards the EA. It's just that when a new fee comes in, we can't collect on that. So the money that we've collected already can go towards that study, correct?
That's correct.
Did you have another follow-up or anything? Okay. Were there any other questions? Councillor Westman.
Yeah, not so much a question, but I mean, great points being made here, but my heart still goes to the existing ratepayers and the promise we've made over the years that development pays for development. And, you know, I don't know. I can't face the our neighbors with this change without feeling like we've, you know, like, I don't know. And you're right. Every person in this community that has a concern about this needs to get on the horn, call their MPP, call province in any way they can, and object to this, because it's going to affect us all and not in a good way. And I mean, we're dancing around the subject here, but this, I do not believe, is a responsible way for our province to handle this. This is not a good way to get it done. So there we go.
Hey, on that note, is there any other questions? No. Well, Lisa, we do appreciate you coming back and clarifying, you know, the questions that were raised in the letter that you provided municipalities. It's not easy work, but we'll get through it. We'll figure it out. I have every confidence that we will. And certainly we appreciate the support shown, and again, the information that you provided tonight.
Yes, thank you. And we'll keep an ear to the ground. If things change, they happen quickly now.
Yeah, and make sure you share good news too, not always bad news.
Yeah. I'll do my best.
All right, thanks very much.
Take care.
Okay, have a good night. Okay, moving on. Don't think we need a motion to accept anything because that was more of a discussion on the letter that we accepted at our last meeting. So we'll move on to the minutes. So we've got the minutes from December 20th in front of us. And I didn't see anything that needed to be changed or to be clarified. So I would ask for a mover and a seconder to accept those minutes as approved. Councillor Westman and Councillor Hodgins, all in favor? That's carried. There wasn't anything new added to business arising. Didn't know if council had anything that they wanted to talk to on that. Then we'll move to correspondence. There was a number of items actually that were received over the holidays. Nothing was pulled for discussion by staff. Did council have anything that they wanted to speak to? Okay, then I will ask for a mover and a seconder to accept those items of correspondence for information. Councillor Regan and Councillor Westman, all in favor? Those are carried. I think that I will go through this awfully quickly. Blue Water, any committee reports? No, nothing from CEDC, nothing from Lake Huron, nothing from fire boards. We haven't gotten anything from our new representative yet from ABCA or Upper Thames, and nothing from Parks and Recreation. So we'll go on to staff reports. Ron, did you have anything verbal? Hey, Tina.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, there is a renewal for the Integrity Commissioner Services. There's an agreement there included tonight. That contract expired on December 31st. We are required through Bill 68 to appoint an integrity commissioner. So currently Greg Stewart provides those services. He is not interested in renewing for long term, although he is willing to extend for 1 year to give us time to look for somebody else to appoint in the interim. Staff has started to look into that process, and it's not an easy thing that we've been able to come up with at this point. So we are recommending that we renew with Mr. Stewart for 1 year and continue to look into other options for the future.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Any comment on that report? Okay, then I would ask for a mover and a seconder that council receive report number CL-02-2023 for information and pass a bylaw authorizing execution of an extension agreement for Integrity Commissioner Services with Gregory F. Stewart. A mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Hodgins and Councillor Regan. All in favor? And that is carried. Did you have anything else, Tina?
I do not.
Okay. Nothing from bylaw, anything from finance, Catherine?
No, don't.
Did you want to just speak to the bylaw that we're going to pass on the fees, the tax levies? And what that means?
Oh, that's just when we pass first of every year to allow us to do an interim tax levy billing in the beginning of February, which is based on 50% of the prior year's taxes.
Thank you very much. Nothing from planning, public works, anything, Jeff?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I have received a sign request for a drain improvement, and that's the Nagel drain. It is an older drain from the 50s. It has a number of issues that need to be repaired. So one of the people on the drain have submitted a request for an improvement. As part of that improvement or request, I need council to appoint an engineering firm to do a report on the drain. So my recommendation is we move with Spreet Associates for our drain stuff. So that would be.
Okay. Okay, so we just need a verbal motion then for that to approve, to appoint Spreets to be the drain engineer on that. Councillor Hodgins and Deputy Mayor Manders, all in favor? That's carried.
Took place Friday into Saturday and then finished up on Sunday. By the time we got most of the snow removed, I can again touch on that. Everything went as planned. We didn't have any major equipment break. We had a couple of minor equipment breaks. We did have to put the V-plow on the grader to open up a couple of roads, which hadn't been done in a lot of years. We did have to put the snow blower on just to get through the sidewalks in a lot of areas, which we did, and it went well. So again, I would echo and say that I was impressed by staff, and you know, we planned for these events, and it went through as it should have. So.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. And we certainly don't need to belabor it, but yeah, it I think went very well, and congratulations again to everybody involved. Okay. Were there any questions or anything for Jeff on that? Okay. Anything from economic development? Nope, nothing. Any councillor comments? Councillor Regan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a quick question. I see Paul's not here, but I just wanted to ask what we're doing with respect to hiring lifeguards. I know that we are going to, and I think we had decided we are going to incentivize that position. I just was wondering if we're being proactive and getting that moving for our summer season. I know it's only January, and I know Paul's not here, so I don't, if we could pass it on.
Okay.
All right.
So
Okay,
we're on a
thank you.
pass on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other councillor comments or questions? Oh, Deputy Mayor.
Just wondering, I don't know where I sit on this, but just curious on photo ticketing radar. Like you're hearing more and more municipalities, bigger ones and smaller ones putting them by schools or parks. Is that something that would be done by the township and implemented, or is that done by, it would have to be done and approved by OPP, or what is, how does it sit in our township if we wanted to look at coming in and out of our town of ticketing photo radar?
Who wants to take that?
I'll take a stab at this one. So through you, Madam Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor for that question. I think the responsibility lies with the municipality. So if we want to put it up on close to the school on Beach Street, for example. That would be the purview of council. That would be a council decision. I'm not, because we haven't done it before, I don't know the exact process we go through and whether we would need, OPP comments or anything like that. I'm not certain that our connecting link agreement has anything in there that speaks to photo radar on the main street, obviously Highway 4. So I can't answer that from that angle, but I would definitely suggest that if that is something that council wanted to do, we could do that.
I'm not ready to make a notice of motion on that. It is something I'm going to consider, I think, in the future. It was interesting from the OPP report, and it was interesting. One of our highest percentage of infractions from, and it was a high percentage, I don't have it in front of me, was traffic infractions. That's where we're lacking in our community. And again, if we continue to do what we did the year before, we should expect change. Anyways, it was just interesting. That was the big percentage increase, and concern should be our concern. So anyways, it might be something to bring forward. Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Okay, seeing none. We have no changes to budget. Any notices of motion? So we'll move into our motions. So first one we've got is that the council of the township of Lucan Biddulph adopts municipal salary grid policy number 101-19-2023 and confidential grid policy number 101-19-2023 as discussed and presented on December 20th, 2022. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that, please? Councillor Westman, Councillor Hodgins. All in favor? And that's carried. And then we have 4 bylaws in front of us. So the motion is that if no one cares to speak to bylaws 01-2023 through 04-2023 inclusive on the first, second, and third reading, that they be considered to have been read a first time and passed, read a second time and passed, and read a third time and passed. A mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Regan and Deputy Mayor Manders, all in favor? And that's carried. And resolved that the council meeting be adjourned at 7:57. A mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Westman and Deputy Mayor Manders, all in favor?